Hi, Learn 11 class. This is the first video of two videos on test taking strategies. This is our final video lecture. I do have a video for you to watch to prepare you for the short essay question on the final test. And that should be watched after these the two video lectures on test taking. The reason is because I'm going to go over in video one. In this video, I'll be talking about tips for test taking and test anxiety. And in the second video, I will be going over essay exams, timed essay exams, and then part of your test for the third test is writing a short essay response. It's a very short essay response, no more than 3 paragraphs, but I want you to follow the structures that are provided in this lecture. So, and actually it's video 2 of this lecture series. So let's get started on the first video so you can watch the second one. All you need are your notes and a pen or a pencil, and we're going to start off with a quick write. So you can pause the video. Let me read this to you. The question is, what have you learned about tests and test taking either before entering Learn 11 or during Learn 11? And this is where you're just going to either write in a paragraph or make a list of all the things you already know about test taking. Please pause the video now while you do that and then return when you're finished. All right, so you should have paused the video to do your quick write and notice all the things that we go over today and what shows up in chapter 9 of your chapter 6 of your textbook to see what methods you're already using. And what information you already know about taking tests. Here's the objective slide. All the things that this lecture is going to go over. This lecture is not on the test. This is a preparation for your final exam. Since the exam is worth more points than the others, I save it for the end. Okay, the first thing to keep in mind about tests is that they always begin before the day of the actual test. Meaning, all the skills that you know about test taking or the ones that we've reviewed the entire semester, it's all about preparation for a test. So when we read, we're reading with the knowledge that we're going to be tested. When we're revising our notes, we're revising our notes with the intention of memorizing important information and understanding concepts for tests. So really, to cram the day before the test, which sometimes does happen and sometimes it needs to happen, most of the time we begin the testing process when we're first taught concepts or on the day of each lecture. This is just a list of all of the things that we've already talked about. There are so many more that we've talked about that are not in this list. I just needed them to fit on the slide. So if there's anything on your list that isn't here, good, you well done. You've thought of some other things to remember about testing. But really, we've talked a lot about testing. It's just been in relationship to studying and to other topics. So why don't you pause the video now and read this list. Take a look at all of the things that you've learned already about testing. In the next slide here, this is just, again, to take a look at what you may already be using as a test taker. So when you look at this list, make a mental note or count how many things here you have already used in your other classes or in this class, and which ones work best for which subjects. Another thing to keep in mind when we get to test anxiety is that when you start to notice all of these things that you're using or that you know about test taking, and you've prepared for a test, it's not that you've crammed, but you have been studying for tests. And you've been putting all these skills to use. If you still show up on the day of the test with test anxiety, it may be that you need to look and write down all the ways that you've already prepared. Maybe the day before the test or the day of the test, just to give yourself a little bit of validation that you've worked hard and that you've done what you can, and you can't control the outcome of the test, but you did everything you could in preparation for the test. Sometimes it just needs to get out of our head onto paper. Now, on page 211 to 214 in your textbook, your book lays out tips for tests. One of those tips is to arrive early before the test. Why would you arrive early to a test? If you said that you would arrive early to a test because you want to alleviate some anxiety because you're not rushing to get into the class, you are correct. If you said that you want to go over your notes before the test, you are correct. If you want to talk to your classmates and clarify any last minute questions you may have from studying the night before, you are correct. There's a lot of reasons to arrive early before the test. In a face-to-face class, arriving early to a test is so important for anxiety, for clarifying, for prepping last minute, but also just because we've all had that experience where it's been us or it's been another student in the class who's come in late and they're shuffling through their backpack and they're trying to find something and it's just really distracting. Another reason or another tip for taking tests is to preview the test. It's a little more difficult with an online test than it is in a face-to-face test, but any chance you get to preview the questions of a test, you want to take that opportunity. Also want to read the directions slowly and carefully, looking for all the guidelines, making annotations or notes of anything that you need to remember as you're testing. Ask questions in a face-to-face class. Ask questions if you can in an online setting, however that is available to you. Otherwise, make sure you get your questions answered thoroughly before you sit down to take a test. This means that studying beforehand is really important because questions will naturally arise as you're preparing for a test. Your book suggests skipping difficult questions and going on to the easy questions first. This is a good way of getting all the questions or information that's floating around in your head, getting it out quickly. And then you know how much time you actually have left for the rest of the test. And that's when the real test begins. Also, you may find answers to some questions, to some more challenging questions, just by doing the easier ones first. Sometimes there's information that is in those easier questions that will be helpful for you in the challenging ones. And then always, always, always before you hand in your test, you want to review your test to make sure that you answered all the questions that you skipped, to make sure that you have followed the guidelines and read the directions carefully. And just as we made mention of writing a summary after each lecture, it's a good idea to write a reflection or a summary after the test, noting all the things on the test that were difficult, what was easy, how studying prepared you and how it didn't, so how you can study differently, what questions, be really specific. How did you feel taking the test? What questions specifically were most challenging for you. This is going to help you if you have to see your instructor afterwards to clarify anything from the test once you get your score back. But it will also help you when you're studying for the next test, especially if the tests in that particular course are cumulative, meaning they're building on one another, and you're being tested on the same information throughout the semester. Now we're going to go on to the different types of questions that are asked on a test to give you some tips. As for true and false questions, if you want to make sure that every single word in the question is true. If there is one word that's untrue, it makes the entire statement untrue. So be careful when you're looking at the details and when you're reading the questions carefully. You may need to reread them a couple of times. You want to watch for simple words that we might breeze over, like all or sometimes. These are very important words, and they can make or break. They can make a true or false question false, or they can make them true. As for the words always and never, your book says that these are usually indicators of false statements. And this is because the words always and never, something is rarely always true or never true. Be careful with any negatives, like the word not. You're going to have to slow down on a question like that and really think through it. Use your critical thinking skills to unpack what the question is asking you. Ask it both in the way that it's being asked, with using the word not, and then ask it the opposite way. So what is true? If it's not, what is the answer? This is particularly helpful when you're, my computer's sliding. This is particularly helpful when you are looking at multiple choice questions. And same with the double negatives. A double negative equals a positive. So let's say that for a multiple choice question, the question is saying, which of the following is not a recommended study practice? And then one of the options that shows up for you is not attending a tutoring session. So what this is actually saying is, which of the following is not a recommended study practice? Answer, not attending a tutoring session. These double nots actually make a positive. So you have to think it through, similar to a math problem where you have to work out the problem before you can actually see what converts to something else. Now we're moving on to multiple choice questions and how to be careful with these. Here are some steps. When answering a multiple choice question, your first step is to answer the question in your head first. Go with your gut. Don't look at the options, but answer the question in your head first. And then look at all the possible answers before choosing one. Read each and every single one of them. If you don't see your answer there, eliminate any answers that look similar. So you might have two options that are very similar, or two options that are complete opposites. And what you want to do is eliminate what you already know is completely untrue. And then when you look at the similarities, ask yourself, what is more true? What is closer to the truth? And eliminate the one that isn't. Now, let's say you're down to two options after you've eliminated some of the other options. Test these answers to see if they answer the question correctly. This will work particularly in math. If you have two options left in math, you can work out the math problems to see which one is correct. Now, if you're working out the problems and you're still not seeing the correct answer, remind yourself to make it easy. Don't make it harder on yourself than it already is. You followed through with all the steps. Go with your gut. Answer what feels most correct and let go of outcomes. For matching, it's pretty similar to the multiple choice. In the same way that you will for multiple choice count your options, in matching you're going to count your options. If you have more options than you do blanks to fill, this is going to make it a little bit more challenging because not you're going to have leftover options. You will also, again, want to look for similarities and differences and play the elimination game. The way English class and learning grammar really helps with test taking is that if you have a blank, you have in column A, look down here at the example in the picture. If in column A you have a sentence with a blank, and over in column B you have different word forms, meaning you might have a noun, a person, place, thing. You might have a verb, an action. Okay? If the sentence in column A, the blank that's in that question is calling for a verb or an action word, you go over to column B and you look for only the action words, the verbs. And this is going to help you eliminate any of the others because you're not going to be given a grammatically incorrect question. And if you are, you may just get the point for it anyway. So be really, really careful when you're filling in the blanks on a matching kind of test because you want to make sure that the word form or that the grammar is correct. Make sure that you cross off whatever you use after you use it so you don't get confused. And if you use one column as your base, for instance, you use column B as the one that you're going to cross off the options as you go, then you don't get confused as you're crossing off between column A and column B. Fill in the blanks is similar to matching. Count how many you have. You want to see if you have any leftover answers to know how challenging it's going to be. One thing with filling in the blank is that if you cannot remember the term, because remember in our memory lecture, we talked about how filling in the blanks is part of recall. It's part of, pulling out the answer that was previously stored. And tests are really good at testing how you access your memory and whether or not you stored memory well enough. But what the test can't do, one of these kinds of tests anyway, is test, whether or not you had breakfast, whether or not you slept well enough, whether or not you were in a car crash right before you took the test. And all of those factors play a role in helping us access our memories or our recall when we're taking a test. So if you absolutely cannot recall a term or a concept to fill in the blank, I suggest, and your book also suggests, writing in the blanks, in the margin, everything you know about that term. So do you remember what page in the textbook it is? Do you know how it relates to any of the other terms? Can you define it? Can you use it in a sentence? Or, if you can't think of the term, use other words that are synonymous with that terminology, just so you can show your instructor that you do know what the word is. You're just not recalling it at that moment. All right, the last portion of this video is about test anxiety. On page 216 to 218 in your textbook, it goes over some tools for when you have anxiety during tests. Some of the stuff on the slide belongs to me as well. They're just suggestions. Always remember that if you have any thoughts that disempower you, ones that try to go back in time and tell you what you should have done while you're trying to take a test or right before you take the test, or tell you, exaggerate things, remember it's disempowering and these thoughts do not need to be engaged with. You don't have to engage with them. It's up to you whether or not you want to allow those in. The next thing you can do is consider the worst and let it go. This can be kind of scary because we don't always want to walk all the way down that line to look at what the worst is. But once we get there, oftentimes we can see that we don't have control over everything, and that's just a fact. So if we've done everything we can in our power to set us up for success, it's a waste of our energy to continuously go over and over and over how stressed we are. So then we can let it go and let go of outcomes. Another thing is, letting go of outcomes allows us to look at the bigger picture and put everything into perspective. That this test is not the end of you. That this particular test does not mean anything about your character. You have a whole life ahead of you, and you are a whole life. A whole life lives inside of you. So it's important to look at you as a whole being. Maybe this test, maybe you're not going to do well. That may be true. But are you good at many other things? Do you feel good about many other things? Are there people in your life who support you? Is there one person who supports you? I support you as far as Learn 11 goes and your academic success, so that's one for you. So you want to look at the whole picture and not just one little angle of it. Life is too big to just look at one little crumb. One thing you can do is write out the dialogue between your thoughts and yourself to see on paper what's actually going on in your head, so you can respond to it in a much more mature, grounded way. An exercise that I did was I was asked, part of the exercise was to write a letter to someone that I love very dearly who is not, who's maybe made a mistake or is not at their best right now, but I'm telling them everything that I know about them and how much I love them. And so I chose my sister, and I wrote a letter to my sister, and it was so lovely and so loving. And I reminded her of all the great things and great assets that she has. I reminded her of the big picture, and that, she's got a whole life ahead of her and all kinds of things like that. And then the second part of the exercise was to remove my sister's name and to put my name inside that letter. And then when I reread the letter, I was blown away. I didn't realize how every opportunity I was missing to talk to myself in such a encouraging, loving, uplifting way. And yet I was doing it for other people that I love very much. And I really believed those things. So it made me question why I don't believe those things about myself and why I have such a difficult time speaking to myself that way. When all of that love, encouragement, care, and support lives inside of me, meaning all of that love that I have for my sister belongs to me, it lives in me, and I can direct it wherever I want it to go. So if I want to direct it towards me and I want to direct it towards my own life, then I can. It's a choice if I don't. The next couple of things here are just some tricks, and they're physical actions you can take. While the others have a lot to do with emotions and thoughts, these are things you can do. One of the things you can do is put a rock or some sand in your shoe. And as you're sitting at your desk, you can push the rock or the sand all the way back in your shoe, and then with using your toe, and then get it back to the front of your foot, and then push it all the way back again. And this is, another version of that is to bring a trinket, something that matters to you, and put it in your pocket so that you can hold it in your hand, or anytime you get stressed, you can feel that it's there. I have a student who brings, in my face-to-face class, who brings in a racquetball, and it relieves stress for her to hold that in her hand and squeeze it. So these are the kinds of things that are much more quieter and less distracting when we have nervous energy or anxiety than clicking a pen, chewing gum, cracking our knuckles. So we want to do something that is much more personal. the last thing here is to constantly remind yourself, as you're self-aware, to take breaks throughout the test to breathe and readjust yourself. At the end of this video, you're going to have an opportunity to watch the TED Talk that is posted for you called Body Language Shapes Who You Are. And this is all about power poses. And these power poses are different ways that we can shape our body or use our body to send signals to the brain that we're calm, we're at ease, and we're confident, we're grounded. In the TED Talk, she starts out her study with the question, can our bodies change the chemistry in our brains? Can we trick our brains to believe something based off of what we're doing with our bodies? Because we already know in science that we can use our brains to control what happens in our bodies. So she conducts a test, and inside that TED Talk, she talks about the test and she talks about her findings, and her findings were positive. So if you look at the top row here, these are high power poses. The one in the middle is called the Wonder Woman. If you look at the guy, he's got one arm over another chair. This is just taking up space. Power poses are all about taking up our space and not hiding, shriveling, not protecting, but really being open. We have an open chest because those are our vulnerable spots. Our chests, our throats, our stomachs. These are the places that we want to defend ourselves. And so during a test, if you're finding that you are, guarding your neck or hunching over, that you're in a disempowered pose, take a breath and readjust your body so that you are sitting in power pose. Now, I'm going to ask you to watch that TED Talk. It's I want to say between 15 and 20 minutes, but it's very, very good, and it's good for interviews. It's good for any kind of setting where there might be a lot of anxiety or feeling unsure. Well, that's all for video 1 of the Test Strategies video series. After you watch the TED Talk, you can move on to video 2, and that'll be the final video until you're ready to watch the video on the exam question, and I'm going to go over the guidelines there. All right, thank you so much for being here. I hope this was helpful, and I will be speaking to you very soon in video 2. Bye-bye, all.